Okay. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. I am Alexey, and today we're going to be talking about what is the DNA of a great growth engineer. And actually, but before we do that, this talk is sort of for a number of audiences. Chris, do you want to put up the poll? So I'm curious. I think some of us here are experienced growth engineers ourselves. Some of us are engineers new to growth. And I imagine a number of us work with growth engineers and are curious to learn about what it takes to help your growth engineers level up and hit the high notes in their career. So let's see. Appreciate yeah. For folks saying other, I'm very curious. And if you can in the chat say what your other is. That is always fun. A lot of engineers new to growth. I love seeing that. Nice. All right, got a product manager.
Looks
Let's
like we're
see.
leveling out here at engineers considering shifting to growth. So that's
Awesome.
perfect.
Well, this is gonna be some helpful stuff. Nice. Some executives. Excellent. An AI assistant. Thank you for joining us. Great. We'll talk about you. Absolutely. An intern. Excellent. TPM. Awesome. All right. Yeah. Growth EM. Perfect. All right. This is the right audience. Great to have you guys. Let's get started. Let's get started. So let's start with me because I'm all three of those. I started growth in about 2016, joining as a growth engineer at Opendoor. I spent 7 years of my career full-time in growth, ultimately spending the last 3 as head of growth engineering at MasterClass. And these days, I advise growth engineering teams through Mule Consulting ever since moving to Japan at the beginning of the year. So no matter what your role, I think we should have something helpful for you. Let's talk about what we're going to do here. We're going to define growth, talk about the impact of engineering on growth, and then get to the meat, which is what are the key skills that growth engineers need to have to become truly great. So start with defining growth. It's such an saturated term. A lot of people love using growth. There's a conference happening in Shibuya next week called the Growth Industry Conference, and I don't think it has anything to do with growth as I've ever seen it. It's just startup stuff. So, I mean, imitation is the highest form of flattery, but for the purpose of the talk, it is useful to have a definition for growth. And here's the one that I use. Growth is taking the scientific method, which we already understand. It's how we learn about the world. It's how we do basic science. We have an observation, we come up with a hypothesis, we test that hypothesis, and then regardless of whether it's true or not, we learn something and potentially we publish it. And growth is very similar. It's just taking that and applying it to the real world, and specifically to the world of growing your business. We generate ideas that we think might help grow the business. We prioritize those ideas into hypotheses. We run the highest value ideas as experiments. We analyze whether it worked or not. Potentially, we roll it out to production. And then the analysis helps us generate more ideas. So growth, I mean, there are many more buzzwords and terms and lots of useful things to think about when you're doing growth. But for an engineer just getting started, the important thing is growth is fundamentally just taking a quantitative approach, a sort of scientific approach to growing a particular business. And why is it important to focus on growth? What's the big deal? Well, many don't know this, but the origin of a growth team comes from Facebook. And around 2007, Facebook's growth had plateaued around 90 million people. And ultimately, Chamath, who these days is an investor and advisor and a venture capitalist, I'm an investor and advisor. Chamath is a proper venture capitalist. Proposed putting together a team to specifically focus on user growth. And it worked extraordinarily well. I think Say what you will about Facebook or Meta today, but certainly they are no longer at the 90 million user plateau. So growth is an incredibly effective way to focus and solve a business's challenges. But it's also particularly important for me. About a decade ago, I started this remote work digital nomad company called Hacker Paradise. And you can sort of see me, I think I'm reading a book down there in the bottom right with significantly more hair. And look, it was a fantastic company. We were just two hackers building something cool. Like, we built a really cool product. People kept coming back. We had really high NPS. But at the same, a few months later, a more well-known competitor launched called Remote Year, and they kicked our ass. Not because the product was better, and we know because people that had visited both told us how much more they appreciated us, but because they were just much better at growth. We had this belief that if we build something cool, the business will take care of itself. And this was where I learned that was fundamentally not true. And so for me, ever since, I've been meaning to work on growth because I want to see the better product win. I want to see the product that I'm proud of, that I believe in, win in the market. And I've learned that the most effective way that I can do that as an engineer is to lend my abilities to growth, not necessarily to product, because everybody wants to do product. It's crowded. You'll see a lot of key takeaways in this talk. If this is useful for you, feel free to take a screenshot. I promise you I will have a sip of coffee every key takeaway slide. And we'll become incredibly caffeinated by the end of this talk. All right. So having defined growth, what's the role that engineering even plays in growth? I mean, that past example was a travel company. Like, well, what's the deal with engineering? And the easiest way I can explain this is actually with a case study from my time at Opendoor. So Opendoor is a company that, to keep it simple, buys people's homes. And I was the engineering manager on the team who was responsible for going from the homepage all the way through to, here's an offer, please accept your offer, and optimizing that funnel. And one thing we noticed relatively, like while we were working on this, is, a home sale is a big deal. So it's really helpful to get somebody on the phone. Like, customers who end up having a call with us convert significantly better to selling us their home. And the original way we took action on this was the salespeople were just realized this was true and started proactively calling people if they gave them their phone number after submitting their home to get an offer on. And this was effective. It's great that the salespeople were doing this. Props to them. But now that we've identified this, we think that we can do better. And the way we were going to do better is add Calendly, which I think at this point a lot of people know. It's a scheduling tool. So as part of the flow, we added this no-code tool that just said, hey, here's everybody's availability, please pick a time. And this helped. Absolutely, you can do growth with off-the-shelf tooling. Calendly was effective. It improved the number of people that scheduled calls, and those people continued converting better. But Calendly is not ideal because it's kind of clunky. It's, even in the happy case where everything works for you, it's 7 extra clicks to schedule a call. And we thought we could do significantly better than that. Specifically, this was the UI that the designer wanted, right? Wanted a human design where it just say, hey, our earliest availability is Thursday at noon. Can you do that? If not, go change it. But now in the happy case, it's 1 click. The problem is Calendly has no API. I mean, it kind of has an API, but it does not have an API to say, hey, what is the earliest availability that the people on your sales team have? And so originally the product engineering approach was, yeah, sorry, it's a cool mock-up, but I don't think we can do this. And as a growth engineer, I didn't entirely agree, right? And to give you a sense, everything with a front end, as an engineer, we know that everything with a front end really does have an API because the front end has to talk to a back end somewhere. So if you just open the inspector console, all of a sudden you see all the API calls and you see all this super useful data being available. You say, actually, Calendly doesn't have an official API, but I could absolutely use it to get the next available time, which is what we did. And we rolled it out, and it reduced us from 7 clicks to 1, and we were able to double the amount of calls booked. So when you talk about, well, why is it important to have growth engineers? I think when you really go for the for that last little bit of efficiency, like when your company is big enough that that sort of optimization makes sense, growth engineering makes all the difference. This now, for a lot of engineers, this approach is going to trigger some questions, and it absolutely should trigger those questions. We'll leave them till the end. There's a little Q&A tab where you can add questions and vote up the ones that you like. But we will absolutely get there. So take another sip of beverage. And don't worry, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. If the reverse engineering Calendly bugs you, good. We'll talk about it. All right, let's start talking about key skills for growth engineering. And there's 5 that we'll go through today. Let's get right started to keep it simple. Let's talk about analytics. My belief is that an effective growth engineer is always curious and always asking questions about the business, trying to understand what they're working on. And they're doing that through a combination of self-serve, sort of WYSIWYG tools like Amplitude, as well as occasionally getting into the data warehouse and jumping into something like Mode to write questions on top of your data warehouse. In fact, my belief is that you should be able to answer 80% of the questions that you have about the business yourself without having to talk to anybody. And I'll get pushback on this, right? I think a lot of engineers who have been in my org, who I've asked to get more involved in this, will say, actually, that's somebody else's problem. Like, this is why we have data analysts. Like, I need to be writing code, and anytime I'm not writing code is like time poorly spent. Like, our bottleneck is engineers writing code. And I don't think that's true for a growth engineer. Like, it is absolutely true that if you're spending 20 hours a week just poking around SQL, trying to answer questions, that's too much. But it is absolutely valuable to be spending at least some of your time poking around and just getting curious, getting your hands dirty with the actual product. The reason, I'll just give you an example here. The scheduling calls example we just talked about came from an engineer poking around, and that engineer was me. I was looking, when we started this team, I started looking around to see what correlated with conversion the most. And I had a bunch of theories, like, does being on mobile correlate? Does being in a particular state correlate? Oh, it turns out that scheduling a call is really, really, really correlative of scheduling a call. Let's see what we can do about it. And in fact, I ended up writing a brief memo saying, hey, these calls are really important. And that went up to the PM, that went up to the PM's boss. And it would allow us to prioritize trying to improve the offer schedule rate or the call schedule rate for the quarter. And that was how we ended up doing that. And while you take a chance for these takeaways, I think one very specific tactic that's useful here is if you do not know how to answer a particular question, find your product analyst, find your your team's data scientist, your product manager, and say, hey, can we pair on this for an hour? I just want to learn how I would even go about answering that question. That's how I learned, and it was a really good use of my time. And if you're responsible for your startup's training program, I think having a sort of a workshop on, hey, how do I self-serve analytics questions is a really high value one to run for growth engineers. Promise I take a sip. All right. Talk about stats and experimentation. I'll start by saying that A/B testing is not hard, right? We think A might be better than B. Let's divide our users into 2, show half of them A, show half of them B, and see which half does more of the thing that we want. But as with things that are easy, it's easy to get it wrong. Statistics is tricky. When you're wrong, it's not obvious that you're wrong. And anybody can kind of tell any story they want using statistics. I think there's a lot of incentive mismatch here where everybody really wants to say their team is having a win. But if you make the numbers look good, but it's not actually true, you're not helping your stock price. There's this Mark Twain quote saying there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And I found that to be incredibly true in my time as a growth engineer, more recently actually than I care to admit. I have made mistakes. We'll talk about SEO at MasterClass. So MasterClass has thousands of SEO pages, which are just articles with useful information. And then if this is useful, hey, actually, maybe you might want to take the relevant MasterClass class. And we started a team staffed on improving the conversion of these pages to purchase. The first thing we did is we made the sign up button up there more prominent. And yeah, actually it worked. It was a 10% win. And if you've ever run an experiment, 10% wins are great. It's so hard to find a 10% win. Like, that's a sizable win for a mature surface area. But when we plugged it into the statistical significance calculator, the win basically turned out to be noise. We could not comfortably say that this was a quote unquote real win. And let's actually take a pause and see what that means. So statistical significance is how you know that your win counts, right? Oftentimes, A will be greater than B, but it'll largely be because of noise, right? And the typical standard that most teams target is this 0.05, which says, hey, there's a 95% chance that the results that we have are not by chance, that the results are because A truly is better than B. Let's illustrate this with let's say we're flipping a coin. We have a hypothesis that our coin is biased. It's uneven. If you flip it 10 times, the only way you can know with a 95% level confidence that it's biased is if it comes in heads all 10 times. But if you have the energy to flip it 1,000 times, 56% is enough to say, okay, that's definitely a biased coin. If you have the time to flip it 1,000,000 times, first of all, incredible. Second of all, now even a coin that's very slightly off, like 50.2%, is enough that you can know that you have a statistically significant result and your coin is biased. The high level takeaway here is the more traffic you have and the higher the conversion rate of that traffic, the smaller the win size that you can detect. And the ultimate version of this is called power analysis, right? Where you take your, ideally before you start your experiment, you take the traffic you have, like how long you're going to be running it for times how much traffic you have per day, the conversion rate, and you plug it into a tool called power analysis. And that will tell you what your minimal detectable effect is, the scientific form, but sort of effectively the minimum swing size is that you can have. And that's really important to know, because if you can only detect wins that are 20% or greater, you should only run really, really big swings. You should only run like crazy big ideas. But if you can detect a 5% win, great. You can do lots of smaller ideas that seem promising. But you don't want to be doing smaller ideas in a world where they're not going to be detectable and you're not going to know if they actually work or not. The metaphor I use here is like the time to figure out how much water you need for your hike is before you start your hike, not halfway up the mountain. And that is the benefit of a power analysis. And then once you get more sophisticated, you can actually start doing a power analysis, not at the start of the experiment, but at the start of the quarter, where you say, cool, we're going to be running 20 conversion experiments. Let's figure out like what the power analysis is for the surface area as a whole, and then filter our experiments to the ones that we think are actually going to be big enough to have that impact. Now let's take a pause here. Why is this something that a growth engineer needs to have? Why is this not the product manager's problem? Why isn't this the data analyst's problem? I think ultimately because it's your time that could get wasted, right? I think not all product managers come from a statistics background or are statistics savvy. And having your partnership there is one of the highest leverage ways to know that you're not going to spend a bunch of stuff implementing stuff that had really no chance to succeed in the start with, like we did with the SEO example. Sip of water. All right, let's talk about consumer psychology. There are a number of really great books in the field of behavioral economics. I love this stuff. I've read these. They're super interesting. It's influenced my way of thinking. But you do not have to read a bunch of books to be an effective growth engineer understanding consumer psychology, though it doesn't hurt. Let's do something much, much simpler, and let's do it by example. So at MasterClass, when you decide that you're interested in joining us, we don't let you, and instead we make you take a quiz. We say, why are you at MasterClass? Oh, what topics are you interested in? How much time do you have? Oh, here are some other classes and the topics you're interested in that you might not know about. Let's make sure that we learn all of this, and only then do we bring you to the pricing page and let you sign up. Now, this is deeply counterintuitive, right? It's even for people that have never done any growth, the instinct is, hey, if someone is trying to give you money, let them. And here we intentionally are delaying them and adding all this friction. Why? Well, first of all, because it works. The quiz rate, as you can see, yes, we lose a bunch of people in the funnel because they don't want to deal with the quiz and they leave. And actually, even by the time we're on the credit card page, a lot of customers are like, there are fewer customers. Like, we have lost more customers because of the quiz than have done it. However, more of those people end up purchasing, and like, that is really counterintuitive. Why does that happen? Well, the useful way to think about this is using a framework called Psych by Darius Contractor. And the idea is, customers on your page, customers on your site have a certain amount of energy left. And there's things you can do that hype them up, and there's things you can do that bum them out. And anytime they don't have too much energy left, a bunch of them just leave. And in this case, the quiz actually is really good for Psych. It gives people a lot of motivation to go through MasterClass because they learn a bunch of their questions get answered. Like, oh yeah, there's a podcast forum, so I could totally listen to MasterClasses while I'm commuting. Oh, like, I was only interested in this class, but you guys have these 3 other classes too. This is awesome. And so by the time they get, then the pricing page and the credit card page will ultimately wear them down, but they'll still have more Psych or positive goodwill left by the time they get to the credit card page. And that's why so many of them will purchase. And if you can see this blended chart, it's that higher Psych that allows more of them to convert. And so the other way to think about this is a framework from Jeff Chang. I'll just read this. Almost every successful optimization framework falls into either the category of increasing intent or increasing ease. So in this particular case, we increase people's intent through the quiz. We reduced their ease. We increased friction, but the benefit for intent was more than the reduction in ease, and it ended up coming in net positive. So the high-level takeaways here, as an engineer thinking about implementing experimenters and an engineer coming up with experiments, is always be mindful about how the experience that you're putting in front of the user is affecting their motivation, is affecting their energy level. Anybody that's ever been through like a terrible checkout page and just given up halfway through because it's like, God, whoever wrote this page was just absolutely awful, like, has felt this pain before. And so even just understanding the ease intent framework and understanding on a high level of Psychs will help engineers a lot, both implement experiments and come up with ideas when that time has come. All right. Let's talk about scoping. Lots of MasterClass examples here, unsurprisingly. This is the MasterClass pricing page. Today. This was not the page when I joined 3 years ago. At the time, MasterClass only had one plan, but a number of competitors and peers had a sort of a good, better, best subscription option, and intuitively it felt like a good idea. However, intuitively is not good enough because MasterClass is live on 11 platforms. It's live on iOS, Android, iPad, Roku, Apple TV, etc. And if you say, hey, we need to upgrade our billing so that there's now 3 tiers, every single one of those teams needs to go and spend time upgrading that infrastructure. And it would take a month or 2 of the entire engineering team to roll out tiers. So probably a good idea is not a high enough bar. We'll never get that greenlit. So we said, well, what's a lightweight way that we can validate this idea? And the way that we came up with was, we built it. So here's we actually built this page on web. And then no matter what you click, we said, congratulations, there's a promo running right now, and you're actually getting a better deal than you expected. If you selected the premium tier, we told you, congratulations, you're getting all those features, but at the lower price. If you pick the basic tier, we said, congratulations, even for the same price, you're getting all of the original features you hadn't expected. So no matter what, everybody got an upgrade. As a result, under the hood, we didn't actually implement anything on the back end. We only still had the original offering, but we were now able to validate, hey, if they did have the choice of multiple tiers, what would that affect on conversion? Who would pick what, and how many people would drop off at the pricing page? And as a result, we saw it was a pretty significant lift, and we were able to show those numbers to the VP of engineering and get greenlit this all engineering upgrade of our pricing. And it was one of the biggest winners of my time at MasterClass. The takeaway here again is your job as a growth engineer is to figure out scoping to validate, not to build. The build comes after. First, you're trying to figure out if it's a good idea or not. And you can execute a lot more experiments once you adopt that mindset. And on the topic of mindset, that's our next one. This is an event that Red Bull puts on called Red Bull Flugtag, where people make silly cars and then see how far they can get across the whatever the obstacle is. In this case, flying. A typical engineer mindset is not much of it's not a Flugtag car designer. It's of a Formula One car designer where I'm going to build this beautiful thing and it's going to do 100 laps and it's not going to overheat and it's going to take corners perfectly. And if you take that level of investment to building a Flugtag car, which is just a prototype, it's probably over-engineered and it's going to sink anyway, so it doesn't matter how incredible it was. And this to me is sort of the difference between growth and product engineering. I think the useful quote here comes from Naval Ravikant. And as an aside, I think this is a Ravikant quote I can't find anywhere. But let's give credit to Naval. Naval's cool. The quote is that a product engineer writes 90% code, which means that the code is likely to be around a year from now with a 90% likelihood, which means you shouldn't be writing bad code because a year from now it'll be tech debt and it'll be your fault that this tech debt is in the code base, and you will be the person you're mad at. But for a growth engineer, you're only writing 30% code. Like most experiments lose, and then you throw them away and it's fine. And so switching to that mindset of I'm only writing code that's going to be alive with a 30% chance, and then the time to clean it up is after I know it's a winner, not when I'm like first putting it out, is really tricky. It's a really tricky mindset to adopt, and it feels kind of gross for a lot of engineers just getting started in growth. I call it the calibrated naughtiness rule, right? A growth engineer needs to not be too comfortable with naughtiness such that they're shipping stuff that's illegal or just like going to break the whole website with a high likelihood, but has a much higher degree of comfort for doing slightly naughty things just to get the learning and then pull it out after a week or two, right? This to me is the ideal growth engineering mindset, right? You have some level of comfort with mischief. I have to say, I've never been so hydrated giving a talk. This is a good rule. All right. Second sip, because we're almost done. I appreciate all the questions. I haven't seen them yet, but I look forward to them. Yeah, so it wouldn't be fair to talk about the world today without talking about the future, and the future seems these days like it's AI, right? A lot of my software engineering friends have this sort of broad panicky approach to the role of LLMs in the modern workforce, that why do we need growth engineers? Can't we just get ChatGPT to write these experiments for us? And actually, like, not a hypothetical, like one of the companies that I advise is CoFrame, and CoFrame does something kind of similar where you just add their JavaScript snippet and they'll go find your taglines and start improving them and A/B testing them and leave you with the best taglines for you to be running. So this is very much real. This is already live. You can go install a CoFrame snippet today. But I think the more interesting example for the role that LLMs will play in growth is similar to this paper recently published by Nextdoor. And so Nextdoor is this social network for communities. It's this local community forum. And the experiment they had is, well, today when somebody posts something in the forum, it emails it to everybody in their community. But what if they change the subject line to not be the user-generated subject line, but a more useful viral subject line about the same topic from the LLM? And in short, they were able to pull it off. Like in the paper, they only cite a 1% improvement in open and engagement rate, but this is just the beginning, right? If you can find a 1% lift, you can probably find a bigger lift. And I think this is really exemplary of the partnership between LLMs and growth engineers, because an LLM can come up with a better subject line, but it's really a data model, right? The tactical use case here is one that's already existed. Like if you think about companies like YouTube and Netflix and TikTok, like that company has lived and died by the quality of its video recommendation algorithm, which is just a model. You still need a growth engineer that says, hey, what if the right place here is actually, let's do an API call to a model, find the right answer, and offer that. And let's create this as an experimentation surface area. And so an LLM is an incredibly rich new kind of model that we can and should be using. But we still need somebody to wield it. It's still a tool in my toolkit. It's not the end all be all yet. Like when an LLM says, hey, we should reverse engineer the Calendly API to build a hacky prototype of scheduling based on a more human interface, then I can go and retire. But until then, to end with our second Mark Twain quote today, the reports of the death of growth engineering have been greatly exaggerated. And that's what I have for us today. Hit me up. I'm a real person. I'm not scary. I'm always happy to chat with people. You can check out the website. Hit me up. But other than that, let's do some Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks, Alexey. I can read a couple out. Colin asks, what approaches have you seen be effective when hiring for growth engineers? We're early in our growth team journey and have an open rec for senior software engineer growth, which we're high level describing as a software engineer who can develop solutions, experiment, and evaluate data to drive decision-making and product improvements that drive growth, but it's been a bit of a struggle to build a good pipeline.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, a lot of these are going to be, I have a good article about this. And if you go to the website, alexeymk.com, I do have a good article about this. I'll give you the high level. So if you want a senior software engineer, your two options are one, hire a software engineer from a company that's good at software engineering, like that's known for it. Again, like the Airbnbs and Netflixes and the Pinterests of the world. Like you can just hire somebody who's been on a well-functioning growth engineering team and wants to do something earlier on. Or you can hire, in the other approaches, sort of the path that I come from, which is this sort of like burned out founder. Like find somebody who's had to spend a lot of time thinking about growth at their company and just wants a job. Those kind of people tend to be particularly good at growth. And in terms of how good they are at software engineering, just depends how much code they wrote before they went and started their startup. And again, longer answers and considerations in the article.
Awesome. Next question comes from anonymous participant. What's the core difference between a product and a growth engineer? Oftentimes I've seen these overlap and I'm confused one over the other.
Right. Good question. I think it's what's the joke? Like, what's the difference between theory and practice? In theory, there's no difference. I mean, we sort of talked about some of it in the talk. Like for companies that don't want there to be a difference, there is no difference between a product and a software engineer. You can take product engineers and just put them on growth surface areas. So where they're specifically focused on optimizing some funnel instead of building a product, and say, great, you guys just do this. That approach doesn't work well. It's really slow and nobody's happy. A lot of companies do this, but I think the better path is to make growth engineering a distinct role, a distinct function, and realize that some product engineers can do growth and some growth engineers can do product, but it's not 100% overlap and people definitely have their strengths. Again, the practical difference between a product engineering team and a growth engineering team is that a product engineering team is building something useful and then using metrics to validate that it actually works. And a growth engineering team is moving a metric by any and all means. And if as part of that, they will need to build something useful, then so be it. It's a focus on metric over focus on building product as the driving force.
I think that's a great question into our next question from Sami, who asks, which camp do you fall into? Measure what matters versus measure everything.
Yes, I fall into both of those camps. So I think if you're running an experiment or if you're focused on key metrics, you should understand the key things and make sure that you're recording them properly. However, if it's not expensive from a page performance, from a database cost standpoint, it doesn't hurt to also automatically be capturing more data in case you later realize you need it retrospectively. But if you're just getting started early on in your company's journey, just make sure that you've instrumented the proper things, because again, the one thing that is a mistake here is if you try to measure everything but manually and not automatically, because now you're spending a lot of your engineering time maintaining some specific like event logic that nobody actually cares about. So manually measure the key things and then potentially auto capture everything just so you have it in case it might end up being useful. But don't spend engineering time on that.
Nice. Sami asked a few questions, so I'm gonna skip down to Karen's here, just so everyone kind of gets into the rotation. So Karen asks, what's a solid experiment win rate benchmark? Does a high win rate imply the team is not taking enough risk?
That is a great question. I think it really depends on the company maturity. I think if you have a high win rate, it means one of two things, right? Either there's just a ton of low hanging fruit and it's an early team and it's just like, hey, we kind of know what the wins are. Or like you said, it's the team is not taking enough risks. But early on, like the win rate, it's not crazy for it to be as high as 60-70%. But once the surface area is mature and you're still mining it further for opportunities, it's entirely reasonable for it to go down to 30, 40, sometimes 20%. So not necessarily a bad sign. Like, yeah, a high win rate is not a problem. It means you're doing well. But if you're really mature and you still have a high win rate, like, I mean, I wouldn't even say you're not taking enough risks. I would say I would be suspicious of your methodology.
Awesome. Ryan asks, what would be your biggest recommendations and largest pitfalls to avoid when transitioning a product engineering team to a growth engineering team?
That is a great question. Don't do it. I think transitioning a product engineering team to a growth engineering team is really risky, because what you will run into is some of the engineers will be really excited about it because they've wanted more ownership. They've wanted to sort of get closer to the business. And then other engineers on that team are going to be really focused on craft and trying to do really good work. And if you move them to a growth surface area, they'll either keep trying to work the old way, which is too slow, or just really be grossed out about the new way and quit. So if you're starting a growth engineering team, my nudge is not to transition a team, but to create a new team, either by hiring or a combination of taking some existing employees that are particularly excited about it. Yeah, I think transitioning an entire team is really fraught. And I mean, like, yes, you can and should do training. There's a number of opportunities around helping them level up and like teaching them, hey, here's the surface area, here's how growth works. And like I do trainings like that. But really, if you make the team from scratch, you'll have an easier time letting go of the old identity, which is sort of the 90% mindset of like, let's do everything at a really high quality bar so the tech debt doesn't bite us in the ass.
Awesome. Anonymous participant asks, and I think, this was a large portion of our poll of audience in the beginning, is, someone looking to make the switch. What are the best pathways early in your career, moving from traditional software development or software engineering into growth engineering? What size of company is best? Any good tech stacks to learn?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there was somebody earlier who has a senior growth engineering position. You should go apply for that. But like really, it's companies have a hard time hiring growth engineers. Like they usually have to convince software engineers that they might want to work on growth. So if you're somebody who knows you want to work on growth, like go get a job and do that. That sounds great. You are part of the solution. Now, at the same time, what size company? I would say for growth engineering, nothing earlier than Series B, like maybe even Series C, because companies that start to try to do growth too early usually aren't ready for it. Like Series B, Series C is usually a good benchmark for not only are you ready for growth, but you've already knocked out the early stage stuff. Being growth engineer number one is a really fun job, but being at a company that hasn't quite figured its stuff out together, like it's not worth pouring more fuel on the fire if the fire is going out for various reasons, if the product isn't good yet. So I would say no earlier than that. And then any good tech stacks to learn? Absolutely not. I think just whatever the company is using should be fine. I think maybe like the way that I would phrase that is like any red flags to look at while hiring is like, can you push code live the same day that it's done, or do you have to wait a week? Because at the pace that growth moves, if the company only ships code to production once a week, you're gonna have a rough time. You're gonna be moving so slowly. And of course, I have a blog post about this. It's the growth engineering test, 11 metrics of a quality growth engineering team. So go make sure that any company you apply is meeting those standards.
Awesome. I think we have time for 2 more questions. John asks, I like your example of opening up Inspector to get unofficial API access. What are other examples of some of your best growth hacks?
I think this talk is some of the examples of my best growth hacks. I think, there's lots of opportunities that you can and will find to to do things once you shift to like, my job is to validate sort of mode. Like things that are absolutely not appropriate to live in production can live in production for 1 week just so you can learn if you should do them properly. So I think I fear I've already given you my best examples and I don't have any more off the top of my head. Sorry, John.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna scroll through the questions and ask one last one. How do you
mind if I grab one? I think one of Sami's other questions is really good.
Go for it?
So how did the masterclass quiz affect your LTV churn? Obviously, it increased conversions, but what about the back end? Actually, it hurt conversions, Sami. So masterclass does a really nice job of looking at the map for conversions. Not only like the measure of success is not the number of people that purchase, it's the average revenue per purchaser, right? It's so we are fine if slightly fewer people buy, if those people are then actually buy a pricier plan, is one. And then it's actually even more sophisticated than that, which I recommend. It's the expected LTV of a purchaser. So for example, like at this point, masterclass is sophisticated enough that it knows that some people are more likely to renew in year 2 and year 3 than others. And so we are willing to have an experiment that says, hey, conversion is flat, but actually the people that converted in the variant, we know like statistically are going to renew more. And so it's a winner, not on a revenue today basis, but on an expected LTV of the people that purchase basis. So as you get fancier there, you can come up with better target metrics, and they're quite valuable because you can find unlocks that you would not expect to have been there at the start.
Awesome. All right, guys, we're at time. Alexey, thank you so much for your wisdom and your time this morning where you are. Everybody else, thank you so much for your time this morning, this afternoon, this evening. Alexey's contact info is right on the screen here. If you have any follow-up questions, and we'll make sure to send over the recording to anyone who was here, anyone who registered next week. Love to see the networking for people hiring for growth engineers in the chat. That's something I've never seen before in a live event. So that's awesome. Have a great night, guys.
Hit me up. Always happy to chat.